Well, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. Before we begin, I'd just like to invite you all to take a deep breath in and feel the oxygen filling up your lungs. This is something we take for granted every day of our lives. But now imagine if the air was so thin that every breath you took was a fight to stay alive. Today I'm going to share with you a little bit about my family's expedition on Mount Everest. But more importantly, I'm going to share 3 areas of connection that were critical to our safety and success. Climbing to the top of the world had been a dream of my family's for many years. Each of the 5 members of my family had climbed one or more of the world's 7 summits, which are the highest mountains on each of the 7 continents, in order to prepare for Everest, and we decided to tackle Everest together as a family. So on April 5th of 2008, we flew out of Toronto Pearson Airport and eventually arrived in Kathmandu, Nepal. Kathmandu is a very old and very poor city, although it's a beautiful city in many ways. We spent a few days in Kathmandu purchasing some of the equipment we hadn't brought with us from North America before taking another smaller flight to a little village called Lukla at the base of the Himalayan mountains. And we landed on what must be the shortest runway in the entire world. It's this upward sloping runway with a 2,000-foot cliff at the one end. The route from Lukla follows the Khumbu Valley that we see here. There's a rushing glacial melt river in the base of the valley. And after a number of days, we arrive in a little village called Namche Bazaar, at just above 11,000 vertical feet. We spent a few days in Namche because at this altitude, we needed to start to acclimatize. As you move higher up on the mountain, the air becomes thinner with less available oxygen. And you need to give your body time to adapt to these new conditions. Now, what your body's doing is it's creating more red blood cells. Your red blood cells, of course, have the hemoglobin, which carries the oxygen molecule. So the most important thing at this altitude is to not go up too fast. If you do go up too fast, you run the risk of getting acute mountain sickness, which is where your small blood vessels constrict and will rupture. This leads to pulmonary edema, where the blood leaks into your lungs and will suffocate you, or cerebral edema, where the blood leaks into your brain, can cause you to go blind, and if you don't get down very quickly, it will kill you. And we saw climbers there with both of these edemas, so acclimatization is extremely important. Which brings me to my first point on connection, being able to connect with our environment. In such a volatile environment, really, that we're faced with on Everest, having an awareness of our environment, an understanding, and really an agility to be able to react and respond quickly and efficiently was critical. After 10 days, we arrive at base camp at about 17,500 vertical feet. And this is where the real climbing begins. And it begins with what we see in the background here called the Khumbu Icefall. The icefall is created as the western Khum Glacier above us, which is continuously moving. It breaks off between these 2 mountain peaks. And as it does so, it creates these enormous chunks of ice called seracs, which move at 4 to 6 feet per day. It's quite a dangerous section to go through. Unfortunately, there have been a lot of climbers killed from falling seracs or from ice avalanches in the Khumbu Icefall. The beginning of the icefall is fairly tame. But as we move up into the Khumbu Icefall, you can begin to see these huge ice seracs. It really was quite a technical climb through the Khumbu Icefall as we navigated our way through these huge ice seracs. There were a lot of vertical ascents along the way, and in many places we would have to rappel down these vertical ice walls into the icefall below. But by far the most nerve-wracking part about the Khumbu Icefall is that there are about 50 of these very wide crevasses in the ice, which are hundreds and hundreds of feet deep, and we have to cross them on aluminum ladders tied together by thin climbing rope. This is what you see when you look down into one of the smaller crevasses. As you can see, they are virtually bottomless. And some of these crevasses are very wide. This crevasse is about 35 to 40 feet across. And in order to cross this crevasse, we have 4 aluminum ladders tied end to end. And some of the ladders in the Khumbu Icefall were oriented vertically. There were 2 sections where we came across these vertical ice walls, and in order to scale these ice walls, we had 5 aluminum ladders tied end to end. And this is the section near the top of the Khumbu Icefall. Quite a technical section. We have to climb up this vertical ice wall, cross on this narrow shoulder of ice before climbing another vertical ice wall and grabbing onto this ladder, which is hanging from above. So at this point, we're really adopting an iterative approach in that we're making a push into the altitude, usually about 2,000 vertical feet, in order to trigger the production of red blood cells, but then we have to come back down. If we stay there, we'll lose our lives. And when we come back down, we really integrate the lessons learned from that particular iteration, and that's what we bring into the planning of our next iteration. And this up and back process caused us to have to go through the Khumbu Icefall 6 times. Then the second area of connection was really being able to connect with our team. Because we're at altitude, we're functioning on limited mental capacity because of the lack of oxygen to our brain. So certainly being able to integrate different perspectives, build relationships was key, as well as empowering others, which I'll talk more about here in a minute. My mother, unfortunately, had a fall just above base camp and tore her Achilles tendon in part of her calf. So she had to abandon her climb. But we did have 2 Sherpas with us, and Sherpas are local Nepalese climbers who are part of our team. So this is Zangbu. It's really important really to have a cohesive team and have a team that's able to overcome these interpersonal conflicts and challenges that come up. We're climbing through a lot of very difficult challenges. In the final days, we're climbing for over 30 hours straight, right through the night, up some very technical sections where our crampons are slipping on the exposed rock. But after almost 2 months of climbing, we did finally arrive at the summit of Mount Everest. It was pretty incredible to be there. This is my father on the left, myself in the middle, and my brother Adam on the right. Over 29,000 vertical feet in elevation. Everywhere we look around us, 360 degrees, everything is below us. My sister Laura didn't actually make it that same day. The altitude destroys your immune system. And so we all got these very bad sicknesses. And she had gotten this gastrointestinal sickness, which was actually causing her internal bleeding. So she wasn't able to make an attempt that day. She did make an attempt the following day, though, and she was actually successful as well. She made us the first family of 4 in the world to reach the summit of Mount Everest. In terms of empowering others, I wanted to share this graph, which is really my view on the relationship between productivity and creativity in processes and procedures. In any team environment or organization where we have very few processes and procedures in place, very limited structure, we end up just having chaos because every new idea, someone runs in it. There's zero alignment in that case. But we have this parabolic relationship in that it's equally as detrimental, if not worse, when we're too far on the right-hand side of this graph, where there's so much structure in place, so many processes and procedures that everyone's hands are tied. And you've stifled innovation if you're too far on the right-hand side of that graph. And so really the key is finding the sweet spot, where we have enough structure in place so that we don't have chaos, but we still are allowing people to use their minds in order to innovate and come up with better ideas of getting to that end goal. The third area of connection I wanted to talk about was being able to connect with yourself. This is all about self-awareness and self-acceptance, and that's how we're able to go through personal transformations. I've studied the human mind for a lot of my life, and I got so interested in our minds and mental health in particular because when I was in high school in grade 10, I developed a very severe social phobia and anxiety disorder, which is known as generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD. And I started adopting a lot of avoidance strategies. It's a little bit ironic that I do what I do now because something like public speaking or anything I thought would result or potentially result in public embarrassment, I would avoid that at all cost. But the problem with these avoidance strategies is our mind flags those instances as threats, even though we haven't actually gone through them. And this begins to morph and control many different areas of our lives, as it did in my case. I could hardly go outside without these continuous panic attacks and heart palpitations and a lot of really negative physiological effects from what I was going through. And that really morphed into depression. I went through a lot of years of just hating that part of me and living in my own mind more than anything, playing these mental movies of past disasters or envisioning future disasters. And after a number of years of that, I finally said, enough's enough. I'm going to do whatever it takes to figure this out. And that's really when I started studying the human mind. And I've done that for a lot of my life. It became quite a passion of mine. I went on to get my master's in psychology as I worked through those challenges. I call it my internal Everest. And in many ways, it was much more difficult than what I'm sharing with you today. Why I mention that, though, is a lot of the strategies I used through that journey. I'd studied hypnosis and different meditation strategies. I used them on the mountain as well. When it came to controlling my focus, there were many times where I'm moving so slowly that it would take me 10 minutes to get from here to the other side of the room. And when you're moving that slowly, the prospect of reaching the summit just seems unobtainable. And you can easily talk yourself into just turning back. I mean, what's the point? So I would play these mental games with myself. I'd forget about the summit. And I would choose my own summit. It would be a chunk of rock or a piece of ice just about at the limit of what I could see. And that's all I'd allow myself to fill my mind with and continue forcing myself to put one foot in front of the next, until I reached that point. Then I'd allow myself to collapse on the ice for 2 minutes, and I'd time it before forcing myself to my feet, choosing another summit, and doing that over and over and over again. And I had a lot of these mental strategies that I used on the mountain. We spent about 20 minutes at the summit, really longer than we should have before starting to head down. And the way down from Everest is considered by most climbers to be even more dangerous than the way up. And it's really for two reasons. First of all, your body's completely exhausted, but also your mind is exhausted. We'd been climbing at that point for well over 30 hours with no rest and no sleep, and our bodies and minds were beginning to shut down. Unfortunately, in this condition, it's very easy to make a mistake, and a lot of climbers have lost their lives on the way down. We had our biggest scares on the way down, and my biggest scare happened just after going down the Hillary step when I actually ran out of oxygen. I realized this was what had happened. I collapsed on the ice, ripped off my mask, just gasping for breath. And almost immediately, because I'd been exerting myself, my inner core went very cold. It's this weird type of cold, and my limbs started shaking uncontrollably. I knew this is a very bad place to have this happen because there's about a 2,000 vertical foot drop on both sides of that narrow summit ridge. I forced myself to my feet, tried to go a little bit further, but didn't make it very far at all before I collapsed again on the ice. And I turned to one of our Sherpas, Sange, and I said, I can't go on, I need oxygen. And luckily, I'm very thankful he decided to give me his oxygen cylinder. Because he lives in the area, he would be a little better off than I would be without the oxygen, although it's still very difficult for him. So I lay there on the ice, he went into my pack, switched our oxygen cylinders, and I told him, turn my regulator right up to 3 liters per minute, which is very high. The maximum is actually 4, but I wanted these symptoms to go away. So he set the regulator, he said, okay, you're good, continue on down. I put my mask back on, started to continue down, but these symptoms just continued to get worse. Until the point that my limbs were shaking so violently that I couldn't even hold onto the rope. And that's when I really started to panic. I thought, I'm on oxygen. This is getting worse. I'm going to die up here. And it wasn't that crazy a thought to have because there's been almost 200 climbers lose their lives in that very same area, and most of them would have entered into the same situation that I'd entered into. I didn't make it very far at all before I came to where my father was. And he'd now run out of oxygen as well and was leaning up against this wall of ice. And I stumbled up to him and I said, Dad, I think I have HACE, which is the cerebral edema I was telling you about earlier. And he had a steroid pill, which you can take to help out a little bit with this type of edema. But I said, before I take that steroid pill, go into my pack and turn my regulator right up to the maximum of 4 liters per minute. And I again collapsed on the ice. And I remember just how scared I was, because a rescue attempt from that altitude would just be a shot in the dark. I would be dead by the time they got me down to a safe altitude. Luckily, when my father went into my pack, he discovered that there was actually a problem with my regulator, which was preventing the oxygen from coming out at all. He was able to notice this problem, eventually rectify the problem, get the oxygen back on, and these symptoms began to subside a little bit. But it was a terrifying situation to go through, as you can imagine. It's still quite difficult and technical going back down. We're looking down the steep south face here at Camp 4 in the distance. This is actually the point where we passed by the body of a dead climber who had lost his life a few years earlier. It was a huge relief, though, when we were all finally back at base camp. And at that point, all we wanted to do was to get off that mountain. And that's exactly what we did as we headed out. The trek out from base camp, though, was actually quite interesting because we had just spent 2 months in Nepal, and Nepal was going into summertime. And so the Khumbu Valley below base camp had come alive with these flowering trees along the way. There was also a lot of really interesting wildlife that showed up along the way. But the best part was that we had just spent 2 months building up red blood cells. And we had a ton of red blood cells in our bodies, over double what I have right now. We had done what you could call natural blood doping. You've heard of blood doping in the Olympics. It's illegal, but athletes will take blood out of their bodies, allow their bodies to build red blood cells, and then put the blood back in to artificially increase their red blood cell count for a competitive advantage. We had done this completely naturally to the extreme. We had a huge number of red blood cells in our bodies. And as we're heading down into an oxygen-rich environment, we just felt like superhumans. We could charge along that trail at full speed, day or night, and our hearts were barely even beating. It was just like a resting heart rate. A really incredible feeling and situation to go through. When we did get back down to Lukla, though, we took the first flight we could out of Lukla, back to Kathmandu. We signed into the hotel, went to the biggest buffet we could find, And after 2 months of a very difficult expedition, we were finally able to relax. Sir Edmund Hillary once said, "It's not the mountain we conquer, but ourselves." And looking back at our journey on Mount Everest, I think this is a very true quote. It's as much of a mental challenge as anything else. And this is the real reason why, historically, when we were there, it was only about 29% of climbers were successful. Over 70% of climbers turn back long before they get anywhere near the end of that 2-month expedition. We had some real advantages being a family on the mountain. The first was we'd already built the trust, but also we knew how to overcome a lot of these conflicts and interpersonal challenges that just tore apart the majority of the other teams. And perhaps most importantly, we really looked out for each other that much more than a random climber that would join an expedition in order to make an attempt on Mount Everest. As with most things in life, it's a lot easier to turn back than to face the challenges ahead. And the message I want to leave you with is not to go climb Everest. I don't recommend this to any of my friends. But we all have our own Everests in life, or in our family, or in our work, or whatever it is. And this is the same passion and commitment and planning and resilience and everything that's involved in making that a reality. So the only question is, what is your Everest? Thank you very much.